I counted recently and I have 9 pairs of eyeglasses. Here's something interesting. Brett Kavanaugh is now a Supreme Court justice for life. The fight to get him onto the nation's highest court was nasty, it was brutal, and it was long. Even as Kavanaugh was being sworn into the court, protesters were rallying outside the court. Now to some, including President Donald Trump and the leader of the Senate, Mitch McConnell, Kavanaugh's confirmation was a massive and landmark victory. He weathered a series of attacks from Democrats, refused to back down, and he won. For Kavanaugh's opponents, he joins the Supreme Court under a very dark cloud. To them, Christine Blasey Ford's allegation that Kavanaugh sexually assaulted her as a teenager was never fully investigated or answered. That's to say nothing of the allegations raised by other women or the questions that Kavanaugh's own testimony raised in the minds of some. Now, important sidebar, Kavanaugh himself has steadfastly denied all the allegations against him. Supreme Court justices, in case you didn't know, don't come with asterisks next to their names though. Kavanaugh's vote now counts exactly the same as Ruth Bader Ginsburg or Chief Justice John Roberts. How he got to the court doesn't really matter anymore. He's there, and he's staying. Which means, in the broadest sense, that Republicans have what they have long wished for, a clear 5-4 conservative majority on the nation's highest court. And that, full stop, period, end of sentence, is a huge deal. Don't believe me? Look at the cases the Supreme Court has ruled on in just the last few years. They legalized gay marriage. They upheld the constitutionality of the Affordable Care Act. They hugely limited the ways in which unions collect their dues. They upheld Donald Trump's travel ban. And they legalized sports betting. Not just in the last few years. The Supreme Court has its hands in almost every part of our lives, whether you realize it or not. What they decide has real-life impacts, both in the short term and in the longer view of how we view our country and ourselves. So, with that in mind, let's go through a few of the big cases that the new Brett Kavanaugh Supreme Court will likely rule on in the coming months and years. Number 1, can Donald Trump be indicted or subpoenaed? Okay, no one knows when we will see the results of Special Counsel Robert Mueller's investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 election and the possibility that members of the Trump campaign did collude with the Russians. And no one really knows what Mueller is going to find. Sidebar, that lack of knowledge very much includes Donald Trump himself, despite his constant mantra on Twitter of no collusion. But what we do know is that Mueller wants to talk to Trump, and so far the two sides haven't been able to agree on a sit-down. Trump lawyer Rudy Giuliani said in early August that Trump would decide whether he would submit to an interview with Mueller within the next 10 days. That did not happen. Now, if no deal can be reached, Mueller could move to subpoena the president to force him to talk. Giuliani has already said that Trump's legal team would fight such a subpoena. And guess where a fight like that over executive power and privilege would land? Yup, the new Supreme Court, where Kavanaugh, if past his prologue, has shown lots and lots of deference to the chief executive. During his confirmation hearings, Kavanaugh refused to address the hypothetical of what he would do if Trump was subpoenaed, however.
I can't give you an answer on that hypothetical question.
Now, let's take it a step further. There is the possibility, emphasis on possibility, not probability, that Mueller's finding could lead to talk of indicting Trump. Now, Giuliani in May addressed this point, quote, all they get to do is write a report. They can't indict. At least they acknowledge that to us after some battling. They acknowledge that to us. Which might be true, but even the suggestion of an indictment would trigger a massive legal battle that would almost certainly wind up, you guessed it, at the Supreme Court. Number 2, partisan redistricting or gerrymandering. So over the last few decades, the drawing of the lines for each of the nation's 435 congressional districts has become, like everything else, more and more partisan, with whichever party controls the process in each state doing everything they can to maximize the number of seats they hold. And with that boundary pushing has come a whole bunch of lawsuits from the folks not in charge of the line drawing. Earlier this year, the Supreme Court punted on several high-profile cases in Wisconsin and Maryland that liberals believed might have been the undoing of using politics as a prime motivator in drawing lines. Now, while the Supreme Court did send those two cases back to lower courts, the justices also acknowledged that partisan redistricting was sure to come up before them again in the not-too-distant future. Quote, "Courts, and in particular this court, will again be called on to redress extreme partisan gerrymanders," Supreme Court Justice Elena Kagan wrote. Quote, "I am hopeful we will then step up to our responsibility to vindicate the Constitution against a contrary law." Number 3, abortion. Now, this is the fight that conservatives have been preparing for years. And with Kavanaugh now on the court, some legal experts, including CNN's own Jeffrey Toobin, are predicting that Roe v. Wade, that's the landmark 1973 Supreme Court ruling that legalized abortion, will be overturned. Now stop, I said will be overturned, not could be. Legal experts think it will be overturned. So how could that happen? Well, in just last year, Republican-controlled state legislatures in Iowa, Louisiana, and Mississippi have passed laws that put more strictures on the ability of women to obtain abortions. Now, these measures are widely regarded as efforts to produce litigation that ultimately makes its way to the Supreme Court. How would Kavanaugh rule on a challenge to Roe then? Well, it kind of depends. In 2003, Kavanaugh wrote this, quote, "I am not sure that all legal scholars refer to Roe as the settled law of the land at the Supreme Court level, since court can always overrule its precedent," end quote. But during his confirmation hearing, Kavanaugh called Roe v. Wade, quote, "important precedent." Now, there's one thing there's no doubt about, and that's how Donald Trump and Vice President Mike Pence feel about the abortion ruling. While Trump himself made confusing and at times conflicting, what else is new, comments about his own beliefs on abortion, Trump made very clear during the 2016 campaign that his priority was picking judges opposed to the procedure. And Pence, on the campaign trail in Michigan in 2016, said this.
We appoint strict constructionists to the Supreme Court of the United States, as Donald Trump intends to do. I believe we will see Roe versus Wade consigned to the ash heap of history where it belongs.
Kavanaugh's views as a Supreme Court justice haven't come into full focus just yet, but if his past stances are predictors of where he will land in the future, he could be everything conservatives have dreamed about, and more. And that is the point. We do this every week, twice, so make sure to check out new episodes every Tuesday and Thursday.